Okay, so that's great. So let's look at sharing the screen now. And what I would do is start with unit specification. There we go. So are you able to see the unit specification now?
Yeah.
Okay, that's great. So what we are looking at doing is, in today's discussion, we are going to be looking at covering, learning outcome 5 and 6. So just a quick bit of recap that we can do in terms of what we've covered so far. This particular unit, is primarily aimed at understanding how research is done. And because we collect a lot of information in the health and social care sector, specifically things like when you're filling in a patient information form, you want to try and find out the background and the information about the patient before any treatment or any let's say care plan can be developed. What we need to be able to do is understand the patient, the background, and obviously where they're coming from. So in some cases, what we do is essentially need to do our research in terms of, when I say research, what we need to be able to do is essentially find out about the patient, the background, any previous conditions that they have, and obviously clearly write them down. And some part of this interaction typically tends to happen either in a written form, in an oral or a verbal form. And in some cases, we need to refer to other documentation which has been created by other colleagues within the sector. It could be a healthcare assistant, a nurse, a GP, a practice nurse, or on the system itself, which is available. And we need to be able to triangulate that data to be able to use that effectively to maybe look at creating a care plan, or in some cases, if you're a GP or a doctor, essentially you're looking at prescribing medicine or doing things which are related to giving patient what the patient is looking at. So academic and research skills are primarily important, and that is where you also try and learn and understand how do you go about collecting data, information, compiling that information into data into information, and information into knowledge, which then can be used for decision making. Now, with that background in mind, this particular unit that we look at, we've got 6 learning outcomes. We've covered learning outcome 1 to 4 already. And the first one, we wanted to do a skills audit to try and understand, our English language ability in terms of reading and writing skills, speaking and listening skills. And we did that through doing a SWOT analysis and also a skills audit to try and see what are these skills that we have, what skills I need to improve. And then we use the SMART terminology, or the SMART template, essentially to put some self-improvement targets in terms of how do I go about, sharpening those skills, or, bettering, or as I say, honing those skills in terms of making sure that they are helpful for me in my place of work. Now, the other bit that we did in that was to try and develop a personal development plan. So this SMART targets that we set for our self-improvement were actually created into a document, which is called a personal development plan. And in organizations, when we work, it is called the CPD, Career Professional Development, because any training, any development, any, let's say a seminar or any training that you go to is basically put into your place of work to make sure that you are able to, let's say, learn new skills or get new sources, new information from different sources. And this tends to be a plan that is normally developed, and it's a living document. And that living document, or a document which basically you update and maintain yourself, and you keep adding new things or goals and objectives to it with some activities to be able to achieve with the timeline, is called a personal development plan. If it is reviewed by your manager, your supervisor, or somebody at your place of work, and if it is linked to your performance appraisal, this could be then termed as a CPD, or a career professional development plan, CPD and PPD. Now, in the second learning outcome, we want to understand what are different types of data sources. We looked at primary and secondary. What are the techniques that we use primarily for doing research, whether it's primary technique, secondary, techniques that we use, or in some cases, tertiary research or tertiary techniques that we use to be able to compile data and then that data is further compiled into information, and information then into knowledge that can be used for decision making. So we looked at various types, like when you collect primary data, it is collected at first hand. It is something that you are collecting in person. Secondary research is also called desk-based research. It is slightly less expensive. Primary research is more expensive because you have to spend time, effort, and money to be able to go out and collect data. We looked at different agencies, different routes through which primary, secondary, and tertiary data can be collected. Primary data tends to be from surveys, questionnaires, interviews, focus groups. Secondary tends to be from already published sources of research, which could be websites, journals, articles, previous research, government agencies publishing data. So in the health and social care sector, we have agencies like NICE, or NICE as we call it, National Institute of Health and Care Excellence. We have NIHR, Office of Statistics, ONS, which basically publishes research. NIHR is National Institute of Health and Care Research. We have the King's Fund. We have CQC, which publishes reports in terms of inspection reports for care homes. So there are various sources from which data can be compiled and utilized. And in some cases, when we are looking at secondary sources, we are looking at the existing sources from which data can be compiled to, obviously look at deriving information or getting information. In the third learning outcome, we basically looked at how do we look at the process of note-taking. So note-taking is a skill, is a technique. And in the old days or previous years, let's put it this way, there used to be shorthand, which was a language that people used to learn specifically, or the art of taking notes by using shorthand when typewriters were prevalent. And a lot of secretaries, or personal assistants, court clerks and things like that used to use typewriters for taking notes, and they used to use a language called shorthand. But now in the modern day and technique, when typewriters are no longer there, we use PCs, and there are other methods through which we take notes. So note taking is then a process through which we basically summarize information and use it for purposes for use in future. Now, this can be done through different methods that we looked at. And note-taking, if I recall, methods that we discussed were Cornell's method. We looked at mind mapping, essentially flow charting and mind mapping. And the third, anybody in terms of what are the other methods that we looked at? So I think it was Cornell's method, mind maps, and then it was the third method that we looked at was primarily I think the outline method. Yes, that's correct. So there are lots of different methods. There are, I think, 5 or 6 in total, but generally now the ones which have become quite acceptable in terms of how it focuses and how it helps you quickly take notes when you're sitting in the class session like this with me, and you want to make your own notes, which are going to be easier for you to recall information, then the process of note-taking comes in. Now, note-taking can be done in 2 forms. Active listening and passive listening. So active listening is essentially when you're looking at, participating in a conversation, and you're basically looking at, then compiling information, which is, let's say, that you're listening to, and then you're basically making notes on it. Passive listening is like, sometimes we also say you're eavesdropping on somebody else's conversation. In a way, literal meaning would be that sometimes when we look at the reverse of active listening, which is when you're preparing to listen, you're observing, you are fully attentive, and you're basically looking at all forms of communication which can happen, whether it's body language, eye contact, verbal or written. Passive listening tends to be exactly opposite, wherein you are essentially listening into information and maybe making notes, but this is primarily done through the process of hearing, and you're not interacting in that method. So here you're not reacting or interacting, and those tend to be the 2 methods through which we could do note-taking. Now, then we went across to learning outcome 4, and in which we were looking at what we have learned so far in terms of understanding primary research, secondary research. Here, the idea here was to primarily put together a proposal in terms of what kind of research you would do in the health and social care sector. And in learning outcome 4, we are primarily focused on actually, sorry, bear with me, I've got a bad cough. So here you are focused on basically delivering a proposal which is going to be on the area that you're going to do research.
Yeah.
And this proposal was a template which I've shared with you. And this template was essentially a template in which you were asked to, you were essentially asked to, fill up this template from a point of view of title, some objectives, rationale of the research, what are the sources that you're going to be looking into to collect this information, and to a certain extent, what could be the ethical considerations that you will look at while conducting this research. And in that template, which I shared with you also, what would be the expected conclusion that you will draw, and how would you go about collecting the data is to be compiled, and that would complete and meet the objectives of learning outcome 4. Now, taking that further into learning outcome 5, we are going to be looking at expanding the research proposal that you've drawn. And I say the word research proposal because the learning outcome 4 talks about you drafting a piece of research, and that piece of research that you're drafting has to be, now developed into a proposal, developed into a project or a research project. And that would be something that you would need to do with regards to the template that you filled, and you're elaborating that to expand to about, say, 200 words, and that would complete learning outcome 5. Now, in learning outcome 5, you will essentially be looking into, 3 criteria. One of the criteria is, primarily, looking at producing, let me put it this way, let me rephrase. One of the criteria in learning outcome 5 is to primarily elaborate what you have done in the template as your research draft piece or proposal, to expand it to make it a full research project. And that is the bit that you have to do with regards to learning outcome 5. And we'll go through some bits on the presentation slides, which I will share with you. Now, once you've developed that into a bit of a small mini, when I say small mini research project, we are not doing a full research, which could be 5, 6, 7, 10,000 words, 12,000 words. No, we are not doing that. What we are looking at is developing a research draft that you have created using in LO4 as a template with which we have provided. You're going to expand that, and it's pretty much like putting meat on the bone to say that this is what a research project would look like, considering the area that you picked up and the aims and objectives that you put in your draft in learning outcome 4. So you're going to be expanding slightly on literature review, maybe elaborating a bit on the research methodology, filling in some missing details on data findings that you would have done if you had gone out and carried out that research. And these data findings are primarily going to be secondary. I wouldn't probably recommend primary at this stage, but you're going to be filling that side of the template up. And towards the end, what you're looking at doing is the sources that you had mentioned from which you're going to collect the data. You're going to neatly tidy them up with referencing in place, and basically put those finalized resources or websites or articles or journals or the research report from which you're extracting this bit of information, and that would kind of help in kind of finalizing the research for learning outcome 5. One of the things that you will, will be looking at would be that essentially this bit you can also present to us via a Zoom session. And when you present to us via a Zoom session, this will be like you are taking feedback on the proposal that you've drawn and the research that you've completed. And this feedback that I provide on this particular research proposal of learning outcome 4 into learning outcome 5 will help you achieve, the merit outcome. And then for distinction, what you have to do is we have to basically produce this to a professional standard, and that professional standard we are going to be talking about is, let's say, tailoring your report into 5 broad headings. And these 5 broad headings are going to be things like aim introduction, which will have your aim, objective, and rationale for the research, 50 to 75 words. You'll have literature review, 50 to 75 words, which is chapter 2. Then you'll go to chapter 3, which is research methodology, 30 to 50 words in terms of what is the primary methodology that you've taken and you've used to go about doing or collecting the data about the research, whether it's primary, secondary, or a combination of secondary and tertiary. Chapter 4 is going to be data findings and collection and findings, wherein you would present some part of the information through graph or table, and maybe some through the triangulation of data, which is relating to your aims and objectives, the resources that you've looked at for doing the literature review, and the findings that you've got after collecting the data in chapter 4. And then chapter 5 is going to be conclusions, recommendations, and areas of further research. Now, when you structure this into these 5 broad chapters, that would be presenting your research, mini research report in a professional and academic format, and that would help you achieve the distinction criteria. Now, for learning outcome 6, we are going to jump back to what we've done as a PDP in our learning outcome 1, wherein we created a personal development plan. We set some SMART targets to it, and in learning outcome 6, what we are going to be doing is using that template to reflect on the progress that we have made in terms of doing this particular unit. So when I say in this particular case, in this particular unit, what I mean by that is you're going to be basically writing a reflective piece in terms of what you have learned primarily by studying this particular unit. And that would mean that you are basically referencing your initial development plan put in place. Ideally, this should be done 4 to 6 weeks later. So you have had enough time which has elapsed between when you created your PDP and when you are doing the first review or reflection of your PDP after 4 to 6 weeks. And that would give you an idea that if you've progressed, if you made progress towards some of your objectives by undertaking those activities, and that are going to be reflected in this particular plan. Now, if you do feel it is not an open-ended plan, so here, again, the same bits that we are going to be looking at in terms of reflection, and those bits that we will look at in terms of reflecting and reviewing would be the ones that we have covered in learning outcome 1, 2, and 3. So in learning outcome 1, we did a skills audit, our English ability in terms of English language skills. We did a review of that. And then in the learning outcome 2, we basically looked at research, types of research, and what we've learned from that. And in learning outcome 3, we did basically note-taking skills, or basically reviewed and understood how do we take note, how do we develop note-taking skills. So on these 3 broad areas, you're going to do a reflection, and that reflection in terms of what you've learned from learning outcome 1, 2, 3 is going to be put into a PDP as a review, and that will complete your learning outcome 6. So I am going to show you and discuss with you how to go about doing that review. And again, there is the same template that we've got for PDP is going to be slightly expanded. So one side of that template will basically show the plan that you have drawn up in learning outcome 1, and the second side, or the right-hand side, will actually show the reflection of the review that you've done using these 3 areas: academic skills in terms of research and note-taking and referencing, summarizing, paraphrasing, and then your own academic English language skills, which could be related to reading, writing, academic writing in particular, and then referencing. And this would then be covering up the learning outcome 6. Is that okay? So that gives you an idea in terms of what we have covered so far in this unit. And I'm going to briefly show you one particular template that will come across at a later stage when we look at learning outcome 6 in particular. So when we did the development of our personal development plan, we basically put personal development targets here, whether they are short-term, long-term, what activities will I undertake primarily to achieve those objectives, and they were done in broad areas, 3 or 4 broad areas, and you can expand them to other areas depending on, maybe using a bit of your creativity, but they will broadly be around English, your English skills, which is language skills. They will be around referencing. They will be about academic writing. I have seen sometimes learners include IT skills in that as well. So you could also do a review or so initially in your learning outcome one, if you've done a PDP, you could include IT skills in terms of what IT skills you have, like I know MS Word or I know Microsoft Excel or PowerPoint, and what are the areas that you want to improve. You could write and then write some activities that you want to undertake, which will help you improve. For example, skills on the IT side, use of PC to send emails, or it could be related to the academic side of things. It couldn't be something that you put on which says, okay, I don't know how to use Twitter for social media, or I don't know how to make videos on Instagram or TikTok. No, that won't be the case. Here we are basically focused on capturing things on personal development side which are related to your academic unit, or basically academically related to the course that you're doing. So 3 or 4 broad skills you can look at, things like academic skills, referencing, IT skills, and then your language skills predominantly on English side, and they would have been covered in the PDP. Now, when we do a review, that review is going to be done primarily on the basis of this side of the template that I've shown, which is primarily looking at what is the date of the review. So if he created the PDP on, say, 1st of June, and some of the targets were 4 weeks, 6 weeks, 12 weeks, 8 weeks, assuming if you were looking at learning a language like French, you would have put targets on which would have been primarily, looking at things which would mean that you will probably be looking at a beginner first for 3 months, go into intermediate after 6 months, and then maybe try and join a course to learn expert or advanced level of language maybe in 12 to 15 months. But here the goals are going to be short term. So when you do the first review, today is, for example, the 13th of July. So if you're looking at doing a review on 15th or 17th, you'll put a date down that I've done a review on this date. What was the progress that you think you've made on the goals which were set, which will come on the left-hand side here? And then what are further actions which are required, and what could be the date that you would be looking at achieving would actually come up here. So these are the bits that what we will need to do essentially to do a review of your PDP, for I would say learning outcome 6 in particular. Now, in order to discuss this in a bit more detail, what I'm going to do is obviously look at a presentation, and I've got a few slides which I want to show and discuss, and they would be helping us to complete, the draft or the draft, let's say the draft proposal that we have done for learning outcome 4 into a small mini research project, and then doing a review of our own PDP that we created in learning outcome 1, and do a reflection or a review on it in learning outcome 6 to be able to complete this particular unit. So there are a couple of learning outcomes that we are looking at. I'm just going to include learning outcome 4 here as well, so that it gives you a holistic approach of what we discussed last time, and it helps you recap for those who had not joined the session and have not managed to go through the recording. So we were looking at doing a small draft plan using a template which I've shared, but this is to be done in your own chosen area of health and social care. That draft piece of research needs to have references, or a list of references or sources essentially that you will use to collect information, and then you have to review and improve that with the help of the tutor. When you send that over to me, I will look at that draft proposal that you filled and then send it back to you to make some amends, and that would help you achieve the merit criteria. Now, for those of you who haven't looked at this particular bit in terms of the research, let me just quickly see if I can pull out that particular template which was shared, so that most of you should have it on your email in any case. But what I'm going to do is just basically bring it forward to make sure that all of you have it, and that is what you can use to primarily, complete your learning outcome 4. So give me 1 second. Let me just quickly bring that out. There you go. So if I just switch you over. and show you the full screen. So this is the research template which I had emailed across to everyone, which basically, the reason I say it's a template is because what we don't want to do is we don't want to look at a full research project like we normally do in higher levels at level 4, 5, 6, and 7. So here at level 3, the idea is to try and keep it brief, and that is why this template was shared. So ideally, you'll put your name down here, you'll write the topic in or the research area that you're looking at doing your topic of the topic of the research that you want to do in the area of health and social care. You might want to put the organization or some background if you're doing it within your own place of work. You could put down some 2 or 3 small objectives, not more than, I would say, only 2 objectives. And then the main aim of the research could be stated here. You could elaborate the aim and the reason behind or the rationale behind why you're looking at doing the research in about 10 to 15 words in this particular box. What is the specific focus of this research? So you have to be very particular in terms of relating it to the objectives and why is this of key interest? Why is it a key point or of an area of interest to you? And then you could fill out some bits and pieces which are related to what is the broad significance of this research. You can outline some bits in terms of how will this research help you in understanding that particular topic, issue, or problem much better. And then in the literature review, you're going to be writing the list of sources that you're going to consider to basically go about undertaking this research. So for example, I had given out some websites which were in King's Fund in the health organization which I shared. There are lots of research reports which are already published, and under the King's Fund, you could go in and look at research reports and pick out the one which is of interest to you. If it is something that you are looking at doing, say, for example, a very simple area of research could have been the use of PPE, personal and protective equipment during COVID-19 pandemic. So the aims and objectives of the research could be that I want to investigate, was the use of PPE helpful in preventing the number of deaths which has happened in the case of health and social care workers. So a report which has been published by the NHS, obviously because of fatalities which healthcare workers, clinical staff, medical staff also faced because of the contraction of virus and when they were looking after patients. So that particular report, and you have 1 or 2 objectives to say you want to find out whether the PPE was cost effective, whether the PPE was useful in preventing infection, and did it save lives? That could be 1 or 2 objectives. The purpose of research is you want to understand the different types of PPE which has been used during the COVID-19 pandemic. So things like a face visor, things like gloves, aprons, you look at face masks, hand sanitizers. There are lots of different types of PPE which has been used in order to prevent the spread of COVID-19 virus. And this was effectively done within a lot of hospitals and a lot of places, specifically because PPE was made available in time and obviously in abundant quantities. So you could pick out anything which is of area of interest, something which you can get information on. When you fill this particular template up, this will essentially go about completing your task 3 of the assignment. And then in the research methodology, you're looking at how are you going to undertake this research. So in most cases, I would have, as I've suggested earlier, that you could say that I'm going to be looking at doing secondary research, which is wherein you are going to do desk-based research. You're not going to go out and meet people outside to interview them or ask them to fill up surveys and questionnaires. What you're going to do is basically extrapolate information from existing sources or existing pieces of information which have been published on different types of sources, whether it's papers, books, journals, or electronically published sources like the websites. And from there, when you collect this information, you're going to be analyzing it to primarily come to conclusions and collecting data in terms of whether PPE was useful or not. So here, you have to mention the research methodology in 20 to 30 words that I'm going to use secondary research and refer to the research onion. And then what are the actual sources that you're going to refer to from which you're going to get the information? So assuming we went to King's Fund, we downloaded a particular research report, and there are a number of contributors to that research report. The way they have been published on a website, in a journal, or in an article, you'll basically list down those sources here in a bullet form, and that would be basically the sources of information. And the results and conclusion is something that you will fill up towards the end when you have completed the research, mini research project, and that would help you conclude that what have you learned from conducting this research, or maybe undertaking and studying the research report, which has already been published, but you have summarized it in your own words. Maybe that research report could have been 30, 40, 50 pages long, but what you've done is you've created a gist or a summary from it, and that has been summarized in your own words. And what you're looking at doing is then also listing out the conclusion of the research paper or the research report that you've looked at. And this would have helped you, complete this particular task. Now, in the coverage of, the Learning Outcome 5, we will look at a few things to discuss, and they would be primarily, let's go through some slides to look at what are we looking at in terms of coverage and how do we convert this proposal into a mini research project. So here, if I look at Learning Outcome 4, we were looking at, I'd suggested some topics and obviously given you some links to look at research reports that you can download, maybe in your area of interest, and then pick them up to primarily study them, and from there extrapolate information which could be used to fill up the template for task 3, and then expand that to basically cover your Learning Outcome 5, which is basically task 4 in the assignment. So things like impact of COVID-19 on businesses. Sometimes when we look at signing up for the NHS, when you sign up with the surgery, there is a form that you need to fill, opt out of organ donation, and a rapid review evidence report, which is available, understanding nurse retention, impact of it on patient safety, the use of 111 service for children and young people. There are lots of different types, and I've picked out a few topics which I think were on which the information is easily available on the internet, and they could be areas that you pick out to do that research and fill that article, fill that template. Now, after you've done it, what I did was basically to organize the way that you would go about doing it and structuring the information out. What I've done is I've created some rows and columns, and in that I put these questions across things like what are the aims and objectives of research, what would be the research methodology, which is where we refer to sampling techniques and size of research. So this is essentially your research terminology, methodology. Then if you are doing a primary research, obviously we would require you to prepare a questionnaire and then maybe have a bit of an introduction before you send out the questionnaires. And this introduction tends to be a participant information letter or an information form, PIF as we call it. And this PIF tends to have this verbatim from you, which will say that, okay, hi, I am Toby, and I'm studying this level 3 course in health and social care. And I'm doing one of the units in academic and research skills where I'm expected to do a mini research project. And for the purposes of this research, I have shortlisted this particular topic. And I'm looking at collecting information from volunteers who would be happy to, provide information which would be anonymized and then used for the purposes of the research report that I will that I aim to publish after I complete my research. There in this introductory letter is basically some information going across to members who are going to be opting in or either opting out for your research project. This that you compile in a one-page introduction or a letter is basically called what is termed as participant information form, so that you're sensitizing them that the data that you collect or the material that you get in terms of information is going to be anonymized. It's not going to be published publicly. If at all in places where the reports are published, they are going to be making sure that none of your personal details are shared. You have the option to opt out of the research. If you're not happy taking part in the research, you can actually opt out. And you're also giving, a bit of a background and information about yourself, who you are, why you're conducting this research, and how is this research going to be helpful, and where will you publish the results of this research report once you've completed, your mini research project. So this tends to be what is called the participant information, and this is normally published, in a form or a covering letter that you send across along with the questionnaire. And this is something which you do normally in a primary research, but you also do in the cases of secondary research, because sometimes in the case of secondary research, if you're combining and if you're doing mixed methods, that you're doing primary and secondary, then in those cases the letter is required. But generally, if you do only a secondary research or a tertiary research, you might not be required to produce this PIF form, because you're not collecting information firsthand, and obviously you're not drawing up a questionnaire or a survey for you to be able to get hold of information. Then once we have collected, how do we organize our research? The research is always organized in broadly 5 chapters, and these 5 chapters tend to be introduction, which cover brief introduction to the study, the reason of the rationale and the reason of study. You also mention aims and objectives of what you're going to try and study and what you're going to accomplish. You put literature review in terms of why do we say it's literature review? Any idea? Any thoughts on this? Why is it called literature review? Any idea in terms of why do we say it's a literature review?
Because we are collecting the sources of information, data we collect.
That is correct. So basically what you're looking at doing is you're basically looking at referring to existing pieces of work which have already been published on a specific topic. And what you want to do is bring yourself up to date in terms of what is available out there in the public domain, and then using the areas which are, or the information which is already available. Information could mean trends, debates, or gaps in the research which is already been published and it is already available either through books, journals, articles, published resources. Then you're going to look at using some of them or bringing some of them into your own research to expand further. And that is where you're going to be looking at a review. So literature, if I look at the literal meaning of the word, literature, what it means primarily is that you're looking at written pieces of work, and specifically those which have been, considered meritorious. That means they've had some review in the past. They have some factual accuracy, and that is where you're going to be looking at those pieces of written work. And when we say review, why we are looking at reviews, because you're going to be going through them to look at what is going to be useful from those pieces of research that you're going to extrapolate and bring it and relate it to your pieces of research. And that is why it is called a literature review. So whenever we do a research, or whenever we go about finding about or seeking information about something in the market or in general about a topic or anything, what you do is you start from what is actually available in current term, in current preset, from various sources. And when you know what is available and what is there out there in the public domain, then you start collecting some pieces of information from the published areas of research, and you then start to bring them into your own bits, which you are going to look at expanding or referring to when you draw up your inner objectives of conducting a particular report or doing some investigation, or let's say research for a particular topic. Now, literature review sometimes also requires you to create frameworks, which are called conceptual frameworks. You're also going to be required to test the hypothesis. So when I say conceptual framework, what I mean by that is that when you talk about the research that you're going to do, how do we ensure that the research that you're going to do is going to be relating to a specific, let's say, framework, which is where the authenticity of that research and factual accuracy of the research project or research process can then be derived. So conceptual frameworks are put into place in in many areas, specifically looking at financial side, when you look at, a framework which has been put like the Financial Conduct Authority. Now that's a framework which has been put in place to manage financial institutions. If the financial institutions default, if they start collaborating or colluding to fix the rates of interest in the market or control the flow of money, the financial regulatory authority steps in, and then they are able to take the relevant authorities to task. So frameworks are essentially created, in research because they allow you to, let's say, put something in place which will allow you to find out what and how you would go about doing the research. So a conceptual framework will illustrate what you can expect to actually find at the end of your research or when you have conducted your research. So it will define and have some variables which will allow you to study and do this study in a finite area rather than being an open-ended area. So sometimes these frameworks are constructed to look at doing, let's put it this way. So these frameworks are created sometimes to allow analytical tools to be used to reach conclusions. And if I put it this way in short, not to confuse you at this level, but generally speaking, if I were to say that if I drop a ball from 1 meter height, that ball is not going to go down, it's going to go up. Now, what is the logic that the ball will go up? So I need to create some sort of a framework with some assumptions to say that under these conditions, when I try and drop an apple, let's forget the ball. If I try and drop an apple from my hand, it should fall down to the ground. But in certain conditions, the apple doesn't fall down to the ground, but it goes up, in the air. Now, what are the assumptions under which this could happen? So this could happen under the assumption that, one, there is no gravity, right? Or in a place where the gravity is less than what the Earth's gravity is. So you would generally see the object either floating or either going up because there is not enough gravity to attract that object. And in those circumstances, you would see that the apple would not fall, but either would stay in the same place or would start going up. So if you were to drop an apple on moon, obviously it would drop, but it will drop very slowly. So these are assumptions that we are making. And around these assumptions, what we're going to do is create a conceptual framework to test these assumptions, whether these are true, whether they can stand, whether they have some sanctity. And this can be done by creating a conceptual framework which is agreeable to the researcher. And under this, what you do is you look at some variables and you make these assumptions to test whether this is going to be possible or not possible. And then you basically go about, conducting your research. So in short, if I say and ask you a question, what is meant by conceptual framework? You're going to be looking at defining it as that what do you expect to find at the end of your research is going to be created as a conceptual framework. And that framework would use analytical tools and information which you have gathered from literature review and data that you've collected from primary or secondary sources, and will allow you to test your hypothesis to say that, yes, what I had assumed as assumptions have come out to be true. And under these assumptions, this research and the findings of this research are accurate. Now, conceptual framework can be of many types. It can be theoretical, it can be mathematical, it can be empirical. That means, when we do projects in statistics or when we are looking at crunching numbers and data for the purposes of data analytics, then in those cases, the research is mostly quantitative. That means number-led. And in those cases, what will happen is the research findings are going to be empirical. But sometimes when we use theories and theoretical frameworks to conduct research, then in those cases, the research framework tends to be a combination of few variables. And these variables are then used to test the theory and the frameworks which are present, which have been proposed by various scientists, philosophers over the years. And because they are recognized and they've come to be recognized globally, they are used as benchmarks to be able to draw these up. At level 3, I wouldn't worry too much about it, because when we talk about conceptual framework in projects that we do at level 4, 5, or at bachelor's and master's degree level, we typically always consider project to have a conceptual framework, and that conceptual framework tends to be more of an analytical tool for the reviewer, which is going to look at how the research has been conducted and what were the variations or adaptations which were done during the time of the research to come to these conclusions. And the context of that is defined in the conceptual framework. So when you're going to figure out and write your research report, you're going to write it in 5 broad chapters. So let's revisit this very briefly. 1, you're going to start with introduction, mention a bit about literature review. Then you will go into choice of research methodology, whether you're looking at qualitative or quantitative, whether you're looking at case study oblique survey driven, you're looking at data collection, which is to be done primary or secondary, and then what sampling size, or essentially what could be the number of reports or number of sources that you will look at to basically arrive at some sort of conclusion. And then the 4th chapter tends to be data collection and analysis. So here you're going to be looking at presenting what have been your findings from the data that you've collected, whether it's test-based research or primary research. You're going to kind of summarize those findings in a few bullet points to say, this is what my objective was, this is what my rationale of the research was, and these are the findings that I've done, and bullet points 1, 2, 3, 4. Some of these findings could then also be portrayed as tables or graphs or pictures to say that this is what I've covered during the courses of my research, and these are the things that I've come across. And you would put any of those findings across, whether it could be tables, pictures, graphs, and obviously information that you write in your own words. They would be all collated in chapter 4. And the last chapter tends to be conclusion and summary. So when you look at conclusion and summary, you're going to be looking at summarizing the whole process that you've gone through. What are the objectives, and have the objectives been met? Has your research been related to the objectives, and what kind of findings have you been able to uncover while you've gone about making that study, or rather doing that study, and obviously conducting the research that you have done. And this would be listed out in chapter 5, and this would cover basically some summary of your findings. And then it could also include some recommendations in terms of what could be the future areas of research. Sometimes we do see that when we are trying to investigate something, due to time constraint, money constraints, or cost constraint, what tends to happen is that we are not able to do research, or not able to go into deeper details to conduct our research. And sometimes these can be then pointed out or published as recommendations. If somebody is to look at your report and take this further into developing and investigating further, then they could look at your recommendations that you made in terms of how to go about doing this project or doing this particular investigation or research. And those recommendations could come in quite handy from a point of view of looking at further areas of research that somebody could pick up and do. Now, in terms of looking at the end part of it, so when I talked about sources from which you are looking at compiling the information, they would essentially all be referenced, and you will create a bibliography or a list of references from which you've collected this data, and that would be coming across as references. And that tends to be under chapter, I wouldn't call it a chapter, but essentially that tend to be towards the end of your research report. And if you have used primary research, then if you had a questionnaire, if you've gone about collecting data, you could present them as annexures or towards the end of your report, attach them as appendices at the end of your research report, which shows that yes, authentically, this has been done meticulously, the data has been collected, analyzed, and say, for example, surveys, questionnaires, if they were sent out, and if the research was primary, they are attached to build the authenticity of the research project which has been, or the research report which has been concluded. Now, in our case, we are not looking at doing a full research, and I'm going to show you a research project now. But what we are going to do is, from the template that we've got, we are going to use that particular template to create a draft, which is basically a draft proposal. And from that draft proposal, we are going to elaborate on areas. When I say elaborate on areas, what I mean by elaborate on areas of literature review, expand the sources that we've looked at, expand into data analysis and findings, and then write the conclusion and finalize our sources from which we've got this information, either in the form of references or bibliography. That would basically conclude our research report or our mini research project. And this would have to be done as a guidance, I would say not more than 250, 300 words. And this would mean that you're looking at probably about 2 pages, 2.5 pages, maximum 3 pages. If I look at 100 words per page, maximum 3 pages that you're looking at to completing Learning Outcome 5. Now, I want to also show you exactly how a research report would look like. Somebody who has done this particular research report in the, let's say, health and social care course, specifically like you're doing. And the idea would be to try and give you, some background in terms of how this was done and, what kind of report has then been compiled by the learners. So just give me 1 second. Let me pull out one particular good example that I can obviously share with you. So let me just have a quick browse to see if I can pull out something which is going to be useful. So I've got it here now. So let me just quickly see if that. Okay. Fine. So let me share this with you, which is going to give you a very clear idea in terms of how you would go about presenting this report and how much is too much and how much is going to be appropriate to, achieve this particular unit. So let me just share this with you now. Now, are you able to see the screen, everyone? Is it clear enough?
Yes, thank you.
Yeah. So what I'm going to do is obviously look at showing you, say, for example, the initial bit which a learner has done in terms of, an internet article, which is weight loss using a tablet called ATHE. And this has been FDA approved. So obviously the Food and Drugs Agency, which has approved this tablet. And what the learner has then gone about doing is, that was the note taking, sorry, that bit. Look at this bit in terms of how the learner would start by referencing, the research. So sorry about that. That was note taking. Yeah. So this bit here. So in this case, what the learner is required to do is create a research plan, which is for Learning Outcome 4. And then once the plan and the proposal is approved, the learner then needs to go about, elaborating that plan into some sort of a mini research report to basically complete this task. So when you look at task 3 on the assignment brief, which I'm also going to show you, it says carry out an academic research project. It covers 4.1, 4.2, 4M1, 5.1, 5M1, and 5D1. That means it covers all the assessment criteria of Learning Outcome 4 and 5. Now, what is the topic which the learner has taken? Effect of lockdown on frontline worker. What are the aims and objectives? To understand the effect of COVID-19 on frontline worker. As you can see, most of the objectives which the learner has set or has discussed are very, very simple and basic, because we are not doing a full research where we are looking at doing research, but from a point that it needs to be presented as a proposal first. So in this proposal, topic, aims and objective, research plan, in terms of how they go about, wanting to do the research. So some of the questions which have been asked, things which are to do with, is to know about lockdown. How is it affecting the frontline worker? Is it affecting the mental health? And then obviously, how do they overcome this particular lockdown, and what are the challenges that this lockdown is obviously giving frontline workers. So assuming the frontline worker here we are talking about is healthcare worker. Now, in the conceptual framework and hypothesis testing, the learner has mentioned stating the effects of lockdown on frontline worker, and the outcome of the research will be that what I'm aiming to achieve. That means they're trying to find out whether there has been any effect of lockdown on the mental health of the workers who work within the sector, maybe losing their job or having reduced hours. Has it created any sort of stress or hardship on the worker for them at their home, and how they are coping with that is something which the learner is looking at uncovering with this research. Now, in the literature review, as you can see, he has mentioned that he is going to be, so literature review is essentially what are the various areas he's going to study first to see that whether there is enough information available for him to go about, conducting this research, whether this is viable area of research or not. So what he's looking at is exploration of work done on lockdown crisis, using secondary methods and using various sources like books, journals, and websites to be able to find out whether lockdown is having any effect on the mental health and working and well-being of the workers within the industry. And then in research method, he or she has chosen focus group either by interview or questionnaire, and getting responses to the answers of the questionnaire, essentially to get hold of information whether this has affected the frontline worker or not. And then they have looked at some ethical issues, which is to say that, okay, the content of the questionnaire and the data when it is collected has to be kept secure. Confidentiality and privacy for the person has to be maintained. And obviously, as I mentioned to you earlier, when you send out questionnaires, surveys, or forms to be able to collect data, you have to give the interviewee or the person who's providing the data the option to opt out of your research. So that has been considered. And then he or she has written about the steps of research, how they are going to go about doing it. So ethical issues means that they need to secure content and permission to use recorded video. Now, sometimes when you collect data, I think it's easier in nowadays during time is that it is easily recorded as a voice file on your phone, or maybe a small video can be taken. And in those cases, that could lead to ethical issues, because when you post the videos on YouTube or other platforms, the learner or the person who is interviewed for the purposes of research may not view it as favorable. And in those cases, they could be arising as ethical issues. And if the ethical issues are overcome, that means the participant signs a declaration saying they're happy for you to interview or record the interview and use it and broadcast it or put it into public platforms. You will need to get a declaration from that person, and that declaration would then allow you to use the contents of that video or the interview which is taken to be able to put or share them across public platforms. But if the permission is not taken, then obviously from a copyright perspective, from a privacy perspective, from a perspective of retaining confidentiality, you're not going to be using the recorded interview or data from the survey or questionnaire collected to be able to share that publicly across different forums. Now, steps of research is basically, how the person is going to be doing the research. And presumably this was done during lockdown. So the learner was looking at basically getting in touch with other participants on the research who have said yes through the Zoom video or through online sessions, and having quick interviews with them to be able to get hold of data that has been defined in the steps of research, means research methodology. And then once this draft has been done, then the learner has presented and expanded this draft into some sort of a formal report. And that formal report, as you can see, has been made in a structured way. And that covers things like effects of lockdown on frontline worker, reasons for research, what is lockdown. So he's gone into the basic details of what is lockdown, what does lockdown mean, who are frontline workers, what were the aims and objectives of doing the research. They have been finalized now. And then literature review, when we were talking only about the sources from which data is to be collected, he has looked at a number of sources or reports from which the data is currently, being compiled for his research. And they include these research reports, the psychological impact report, which is by Brain Behave Immune Health Institute, analyzing the impact of COVID-19 on frontline workers using machine learning. So maybe some report. And then obviously a COVID report, which has been published by NHS healthcare staff. So these reports, along with the impact of COVID-19 pandemic report, have these are the various reports, which have been taken into account primarily for the purposes of his research that he has done and the collection of sources from which the data has been, essentially compiled. So these are useful because they have been, used, referenced by the person to collect the information. And because this is desk-based research, as you can see, most of it is reports that he's picked up, online. And if they are related to, looking into the effects of COVID-19 on frontline workers, and these are reports, which means they are optimal, they are useful for the research being conducted, and then outline the research methods, the ethical issues, and this concludes, along with the references which have been put, concludes essentially the research report from a learner's perspective. Now, after this has been submitted to the tutor has given feedback in terms of what the report is and how it can be structured. So obviously, the tutor has given feedback that could you further look at modifying your report and bring it into these 5 broad headings. That would essentially give it a formal structure, these 5-6 broad headings. And what the learner has then gone about done is included the feedback and then restructured some part of it wherein it has been streamlined to reflect the structure which the tutor is asking. And that has helped in the achievement of the merit tasks, as you can see. Is that okay? And last but not the least, when the report has to be produced to the academic standards, as you can see, further elaboration has been done in terms of talking about background to the research, which has been taken up from World Health Organization. Then obviously some parts which have been covered in the proposal are included. And then some bits have been expanded, as you can see in the report, which basically show that the learner has gone about doing some research investigation into from different sources to collect this data. As you can see, literature review has been expanded. It's not just a listing of resources right now. It has been expanded to directly related to the topic and the topic of the research, which is frontline workers, and whichever areas are directly related to research have been expanded under the heading of literature review. Research methods, as you can see, have been elaborated as well. So he has gone about collecting this through, the questionnaire. He has mentioned about the average age of the participant, how many questions were asked and, what was the outcome of the questions, about how the data was recorded in the form of audio and text forms. So that has been analyzed, that has been collected and mentioned in the research methodology. Analysis of his data, which has been basically the collection of forms and the audio reports, are then summarized into findings. And some of the findings have been grouped into various headings, things like, there's fear of anxiety due to the lockdown, and, some verbatim has been given, work-related stress, again, an outcome, and then the summary in terms of what has been the outcome of the research has been published towards the end, with recommendations in terms of how to cope with the lockdown have also been made. With conclusion, and this tends to complete off the research project which the learner has done. Is that okay?
Yeah, it's okay, but I can see like the this work is about almost 40, 50 pages.
That's correct.
Are you asking us to write the maximum of 3 pages? How does that work?
That is correct. So when we look at, this particular report, this is a report in which the learner has attempted all the tasks, of the unit. So the learner has achieved distinction in this case for this unit. So obviously, because of the tasks which have been done and addressing of all the merit and extension criteria, the learner has been able to achieve a highest grade, and because of which, the length of the assignment is exceptionally long. And in order to course correct this, that is why I have suggested that we follow a template for the research in terms of drawing up the proposal, because they will keep it narrow and obviously they will keep it crisp in terms of having to achieve what the learner has written across the report, and some part of the report is repetitive. So if I look at, the learning outcome 4, in which the learners try to create a proposal, some parts of it are exactly copied back again into the finalized version of the report. And that is where it has increased the word limit. So in order to ensure that there is no duplication, what I've suggested is that we follow the templates which I have provided. And following these templates would essentially mean that you would not be looking at repeating the same bit of information when you create the draft proposal. And then when you summarize it to create a research report, these parts would be mutually exclusive. They will not be repeated or repeatedly copied to show that the report or the assignment has been done.
Okay, noted. Thank you.
Okay, so that is where I think some part of the approach has changed at our end, is to ensure that we do these using some templates rather than repeating the information again and again. So ideally, now one other point which I would like to address, which is the other side of the coin which you've asked, is that sometimes when you look at the research reports, learners are using font size which is quite bigger, spacing on the report, the way they have been written, and sometimes, like if I look at this bit, if you see in the document, this is actually verbatim which has been copied from the assignment brief, which is not required. And for every task, the learner has actually copied the whole section of the assignment brief. So if I share the full screen, what you'll be able to relate to is that this bit does not need to be copied. So if I go into task 4, and if I go into task 4 here, what you will see is the learner has copied the entire bit and put it into the document. Can you see this?
Yeah.
Yeah. And this has been time and again. Now, this is helpful from a learner's perspective, because you then know that what exactly you're covering in the document. But from a word limit perspective, if I look at the true word limit, this is 104 words which have been written. Similarly, when I go into other tasks, everything has been copied from the assignment brief, which would obviously reduce the word count. So for example, look at this one here. Now, references could have been compiled towards the end, and I would have just written refer to an extra 1. And these references are again replicated towards the end of the project, as you can see, and they are obviously increasing the word limit. So it's a way of looking at formatting and structuring your work. If I just go into the first bit of the assignment, the learner has put in the word assessed report as well, which is something which I wouldn't probably do because this is where I've done the commenting. This is not required. So if I have to, make this, if I have to remove this, you would see the number of pages, how it begins to go down quite quickly. Task 1 copied. If I look at task 1 here, fully copied as it is, word by word. I will start from here, which is fine. Which is basically 1.1, but this bit is fully copied. I don't need this. And if I go down, I'll basically trim the assignment down to, maybe 15 to 20 pages maximum. And the other bit, obviously, which the assessor has done is something which I can also say is that the feedback has also been appended here. Now, if I have to look at showing you feedback on a particular assignment, generally, when we give feedback, we'll give you feedback on a front cover sheet, and that front cover sheet is only for your reference. So that will be not a part of this particular assignment. So in some cases, what will happen is when you see the front cover sheet, just to give you an example, this is how the summary sheet will be, which will give you an outline that, okay, you passed the unit, this is the grade you achieved, and this is full and final. So I won't probably put feedback and other bits into the assignment itself. So if I start deleting it, probably will go down to about 15 to 18 pages. Is that okay?
Okay.
It is a case, it is a personal preference. As you can see, from 17,000 words, it's already gone down to 18,000 words. But if you see, these are all templates that we provided. So smart targets, these are templates which are provided, which the learners integrated. But if you're looking at retaining this as a portfolio of your own work for future references, then what you have done and how you've gone about doing it, and maybe following that as a learner, what the learner has done here is going to be useful, because this will help you keep track of everything in one document rather than following so many documents. So this is, as you can see, a template which is given towards the end of the assignment brief. And the learner has copied that as well.
Okay.
Okay. So I wouldn't probably recommend this to be copied, because some part of it is, as you can see, the headings could have been typed and you could have started doing the document, but these are all adding up to your word limit, which is of no use as far as the assignment is concerned, because when I mark it, I know that I need to look at these areas and I need to mark it. So this will go down, considerably go down.
Yeah.
But this is just giving you an idea in terms of, how the assignment needs to be done. And that is why the approach now, and this was maybe an example of 2020, that's why the approach now is to use some of the templates to do it intelligently and in a way which is manageable. And it is something which is more presentable and easier to follow rather than do it in a one single large document.
Okay.
Okay, so any other questions on Learning Outcome 5? Any questions that you want to ask on Learning Outcome 5? Okay, let's briefly go across to Learning Outcome 6, which is where we have to basically do reflection. Now, do you know the meaning of the word reflection? What do you mean by reflection? Anybody, in terms of what is the meaning of reflection? So when we say reflection, what we are looking at is
to think about what we previously learned.
Yeah.
Correct. Yeah, you're going to go about recollecting what you've actually learned from this and why you've taken certain steps to, complete this. So basically, a reflection is a serious thought or a consideration that you're going to put in to see what you've learned, and you're going to just basically summarize it in your own words as a summary and write it down as a bit of a concise, summarized note. So Learning Outcome 6 is basically focused on being able to reflect on how you have been able to monitor your academic progress. And this is specifically across Learning Outcomes 1, 2, and 3. So when I look at Learning Outcome 1, 2, and 3, one of the bits that I need to look at when we look at talking about reflection, we need to look at understanding what is CLOB's learning framework. This is a theoretical bit that we need to understand. So CLOB's learning framework or reflective cycle or learning cycle, KLC as it is called, he was a scientist who basically, a psychologist rather, not a scientist, but yes, he did a lot of work in terms of, making sure that when we learn, there are various ways, and every individual is different. So there are different ways through which we learn. And when we talk about, David CLOB, he basically proposed, certain learning styles in the late 1980s. And these have now become synonymous with what is called the CLOB's learning cycle or learning styles. Now, he did a lot of research because he was a psychologist. He did a lot of research and a lot of studies. And what he did and came out with when he proposed this particular model is that every individual is different, and individuals learn through different phases or go through different phases in terms of their learning. And this can be based on experience. It can be based on reflection. It can be based on studying abstract thoughts, or sometimes it can be concrete experience which you've learned by doing things yourself. So he came across with these 4 pillars that we see in the CLOB's learning cycle or learning styles. And these 4 actually help us understand how would we go about learning, how do we undertake the learning process. So he defined learning to be a process wherein knowledge can be created through transformation of experience. And that is where this 4 pillars, or the 4, let's say, pillars of the experiencing transformation that the person can witness came in when he proposed the cycle. Now, he talks about 4 different phases. What is the cycle or the framework all about? It's all about self-reflection. When you do learning as a process essentially. Now, this can be done in very different ways. You have self-managed learning, you have lifelong learning. And then you can also learn things or do learning when you do things yourself, and through experience you do learning. You can also learn when you study an academic course or when you undertake a study, and that is also a process of learning. So there are various ways through which individuals can learn. Self-managed learning is you can plan your own learning, you know what activities to undertake, and you're a mature learner, and what you do is you plan it in such a way that it is going to help you gain certain skills, or reduce certain threats or weaknesses that you're in over a period of time. Now, he talked about these 4 different things, which is 4 reflected in the cycle. The first thing he talks about is concrete experience. And concrete experience, he says, the learners encounter when they are faced with a situation in terms of either doing it or they are experiencing it. And in this case, the existing experience, in the case of the learners, the ability to be able to experience that because they've done it themselves, allows them to get concrete experience. And this is the first phase of learning, or one of the phases of learning. Then the second phase he talks about is what is called reflective observation of new experience. So here in this case, he says the learner is actually able to review and reflect on the experience that they have gained from existing knowledge. And this tends to bring across further questions or inconsistencies in terms of, with a hindsight, sometimes we say that I could have done this like this, or with a hindsight, I would have done it better. I would have done it this way. So when you look at doing a reflection, when you're looking at doing, with a bit of a hindsight, you're looking at what you've done and how you've done, you would look at reflective observation. The third he talked about is abstract conceptualization. So here he talks about reflection, which gives rise to new ideas or a modification of the existing idea which is in place. And this is where what will happen is you will come ahead and challenge, and you'll come across and basically talk about different experiences or different forms of learnings which can be done from the same experience. And this is where the abstract conceptualization happens. And the 4th phase, or 4th type that he talked about, was active experimentation, wherein he says that you're eager to try out new things, you're eager to learn new things. So here what you're doing is you're going to be open to the idea of experimentation, and you're going to see how it works, whether it works for you, doesn't work for you, but you're open to the idea of experimentation. Now, through this 4-phase process, he talks about that learning can help, this process of learning can be very helpful for an individual. And when we talk about this, in general, people then go through these 4 phases. They first experience something, then they reflect on it, then they look at how some part of it by changing some of the variables, and then they want to test it again, and then they want to go and experience that back again. So this bit of the circle that you go through, wherein you experience, reflect, conceptualize, retest, and then re-experience, is the concept of learning framework which CLOB has actually proposed. Now, why is it important for learning outcome 6? Is because we are going to be reflecting on our own progress in terms of academic progress on this particular unit, and specifically related to the learning outcome 1, 2, and 3, which is things like personal development plan that we created by doing SWOT and skill audit analysis using the SMART template. In the second learning outcome, learned about research techniques and methods, primary / secondary. In the third one, we talked about the understanding what could be the methods of note taking. So what we're going to do is put this onto a PDP that we've done in learning outcome 1 and then reflect on it in learning outcome 6. So here, this particular cycle, CLOPS learning cycle, is helpful to understand that, okay, what we've learned by going through the lecture or the seminar, then we've come to reflect on what we've learned in the unit. Sorry, what we've gained as knowledge. All right, and what we've gained as knowledge. And then we have used that knowledge to basically improve our personal development plan. And then we are reviewing that plan to put more activities or adjusted activities into place to be able to improve on our weaknesses and improve on the areas which could be posing as threats. And that is what we are going to be looking at doing in learning outcome 6. So here, if I look at first things first in the PDP, that format which is given in the assignment brief, and I'll show that to you on a slide, what we have to do is see what we have learned first. What are the areas of improvement? These are going to come from SWOT analysis that you did and the PDP that you created in the first learning outcome. And then what you're going to do is primarily fill this template up to develop it further, because you're reflecting that, okay, I had put a target that I'll be able to learn Harvard referencing. Have I been able to hit that target of learning Harvard referencing? Yes or no? If you have not been able to do it, then you will put a new activity and a new target date in place, because you're not reflecting on what I did undertake as activities by watching the Harvard referencing video, maybe looking at using a citation generator on the internet, but I'm still not very confident in terms of my referencing techniques. So what you will need to do is then undergo some sort of training in terms of learning how to academically reference, how to use direct quotes, how to paraphrase some part of the quotes that you pick out from books, articles, journals, websites, and then write it in your own words without changing the meaning of the context for which you are actually taking that up. Now, the activity that you're going to undertake is going to be a reflection, because the first one that you did in the learning outcome 1, creation of PDP, did not help you achieve it. So now you're putting in a second activity in place, and that is with reflection, that you're going to review the activity, and the change of activity will allow you to hopefully now perfect your technique of Harvard referencing. So this bit has to be done, wherein what you're doing is reviewing your PDP that you have developed in learning outcome 1. You're reviewing it here in learning outcome 6. But what you're doing is, when you review it, you're going to say a date of review. You're going to say the progress that you made towards that review, and if there is any further action which is required, and what would be the actual date on which you'll be able to complete this further action, allowing you to essentially, complete the review or reflection of your, personal development plan. Is that okay? Is that visible? Sorry, I had a message from Christina saying that screen is blank. Are you able to see the screen?
Yeah, I logged in again. That's fine. I'm all right now. Thanks.
All right. Okay, no worries. So basically, looking at, this is primarily just the case wherein you have to look at doing a bit of reflection on what you've already created. And that is going to be using this particular template that we've got. And that would essentially be the review of the PDP that you're going to do from learning outcome 1. Is that okay? So this particular unit, as you would have seen, is all about doing things. It's about be able to. It is not understand. The descriptors in the case of this unit, if some of you have not realized, let me just quickly point you towards the unit specification. There's a difference. If you see, it says be able to. That means we have to go about doing it. Here it says no. That means it's about understanding. You're basically just going to theoretically study it. Again, it says be able to take notes. So you have to theoretically take notes. Here again is be able to. So that means you have to do it. You have to put this into practice. It is not something which is going to be possible to, submit as an assignment, essentially by, talking about it theoretically or descriptively. You have to be able to, do this by essentially, putting out a template or practically doing it by implementing it on yourself. And that is where it will mean be able to. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Right. So any questions on today's session?
Regarding what I said before, the pages. So you
Yes.
said maximum 3 pages to complete the LO5 should just be adequate.
I would say yes, maximum 3 pages, because if you follow the activity 3, which is primarily done through the research proposal, that would mean the research proposal is already done.
Yeah.
And what you're doing then is basically elaborating on the proposal that you created by dropping it into a Word format as a report, and then structuring it out into 5 different chapters.
Right.
Introduction, literature review, research methodology, and that is where you're going to be writing 30 to 50 words, 50 to 75 words in the case of literature review, and use maybe tables from the report that you picked out from your area of research. Maybe look out clipping some pictures or reports or tables from the report that you've taken for research, and then include that in your data collection and findings, and that would help you, complete the task 5 or LO5.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay, so in this particular unit, what we've also done is we pretty much discussed, the assignment requirements as well as we have gone along. So from our point of view, I think this session would also conclude the unit and the unit assignment discussion, because here, in most cases, the assignment is in the form of templates that are provided. The assignment is in the form of tasks, sorry. And when I say tasks, I've also provided you templates which allow you to essentially complete each of the tasks of the assignment brief. And that at the end will also help you complete the assignment as a whole for this particular unit. Is that okay?
Yeah.
So let me just quickly bring up the assignment as well while we are on this particular discussion. So if I look at, this is the assignment brief for the unit, which I'm going to send you on the email. But how we've gone about doing the assignment is by breaking it into tasks. So task 1, most of you, I think I've got 3 or 4 submissions so far, have submitted me your SWOT analysis and the PDP that you did and the SMART template that you've used, which I've sent across. So if I minimize this for a minute and then also start showing you some of the templates that I've sent, and they are all up on Moodle. If you do complete these 3 templates, 1 for SWOT analysis, 1 for your PDP, and 1 for the SMART objectives, you would have completed task 1 straight away. So task 1 is basically completing 3 templates, and you would achieve and hit 1.1, 1.2, and 1M1 easily. If I go to task 2, which is about note taking, in this, what we've done is I've also sent you a template wherein I've added a graph. In one case, it is a COVID-19 graph or a table. And in the third case, it's a picture or an extract from a website. And if you interpret them in your own words and write a bit of summary underneath, that would again complete task 3, because that would mean that you would have understood the process of note taking. You've read the graph, you've read the table, you've read the article, and what then you've done is basically represented and paraphrased it and written a summary of it in your own words, and that would help achieve, task 2, which is the task 2 in terms of note taking. Is that okay?
Yeah.
Hello, but I have no.
Yes, go on. So I'm going to show you a few templates just to make sure that everyone has them and everyone is able to then follow them through for completing some of the bits that I'm explaining right now. And I'm going to share my whole screen so that you're able to see these templates. And if you haven't got them, then you should log into Moodle and get hold of them. So if I go back to the assignment brief first, let me just organize the bits that I'm going to show you. So if I look at task one, first task was all about, you guys looking at doing a SWOT analysis.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you. Go on. Yes, go on. So this was the first task wherein you have to do a SWOT analysis. You have to classify your skills into hard skills and soft skills. And basically, this is the first task. Now, once you have done this, what you have to do then after that is primarily start using the SMART template. And with this use of this SMART template, essentially put your goals down to say why they are specific in terms of measurable, achievable, realistic, and time bound. You could have just 2 goals or 2 or 3 targets. That is absolutely fine. It depends all on how you have done your SWOT analysis. So if you have lots of weaknesses, you feel there are lots of areas that you need to increase or improve yourself in terms of your knowledge, your skills, you would maybe then have more than one SMART objective. And in those cases, what you're looking at doing is filling this template up, again and again. So basically it's a replication of the same template, but I copy and paste and then paste it again. And that is basically your second weakness, third weakness, or maybe your first threat or your second threat. Now, once you've done the SWOT and the SMART target filling, then what you have to do is basically develop a PDP. So I will show you a PDP as well. And a PDP template that I've shared with you is, so let me just share the PDP template as well. PDP, where is it disappeared? PDP. So PDP template that I've shared with you. There we go. Sorry. So that's the PDP template that I've shared. And in the PDP template, this is the template. There is some verbatim given for you to understand what is a personal development plan, how do you go about doing it. And this is the template that I've suggested that you use. And this would be completing task 1M1. So if you do 3 things, which is 1, your PDP, your SMART objectives, and your SWOT, you are done with task 1. And you're using these 3 documents, which are going to be submitted as a part of your assignment. If I go to task 2, which is all about note-taking. So in note-taking, what we have to do is I'll minimize these now because I don't need these. So in note-taking, I've shared a template with you, which basically talks about how do you paraphrase and summarize information by either listening actively or by passively listening. So for example, if you listen to the news, I have put a small extract of a screenshot. And what I've done is I've listened to the news briefing on coronavirus. And what I would need to do is write this news paragraph briefing that I've heard in my own words, in about 20 to 30 words, without altering the meaning of it. And that would be active note-taking. That means you have been able to summarize the points by listening into a piece of news on television. If you also can look at active listening, you are watching a YouTube video. And with that YouTube video, you're listening into the video. And what you're doing is then summarizing the message of the video in your own words. And that would also be active listening. That would help you complete note-taking. Assuming you are looking at doing a summary of this webinar that I'm doing now, that would mean that you are going to make your own notes, that these were the things which were discussed, learning outcome 4, 5, and 6. There was a recap of the unit. There's a discussion on the assignment. And what you're doing is basically writing it in your own words to summarize the information which was delivered on this particular session. And that is the process of note-taking. Now, if you do this, And this is a template which I've also shared. This would allow you to complete your task 2. Okay. Now, if I go to task 3, which is about research proposal, this is what I've sent across on email to everyone. So if you fill this up and send it back to me, that would complete all these tasks. Your research plan, outline of your research plan, carrying out the research, primary, secondary information, first draft of your research, listing all the sources from which you will collect information. This will all cover your task 3. Right? Now, when you send it back to me and I revert back to you with some feedback, that is also meeting the merit criteria in terms of taking feedback from your tutor. And when you take that feedback from me, because I've made some comments on the right-hand side, annotated comments, and when you make those changes in the same document and send it back to me, showing that this improvement is what you have done as per what I've recommended, that would mean you're meeting all the merit criteria as required for this particular task. Okay.
Yeah.
Now, for the 4th task, which is what are you going to do in terms of, so distinction part of this is primarily now looking at you presenting your work orally. And that presentation of work can be done either through recording via a Zoom webinar, or you can send in an email to me. And what I will do is basically be present as an audience. And you're going to be presenting that what is the summary, what is your research that you've done. And you're going to make a short presentation of about 5 minutes or 7 minutes to discuss what has been the areas of research, how you've gone about doing it, what is the result and the conclusion. And if I ask 1 or 2 questions out of it for the presentation that you've done, that would also be meaning that you have taken some oral feedback and answered some viva voce, which is question answers, and that would help you achieve distinction.
I want that one.
Yeah. And then the last task, which is task 4, is all about completing and reviewing your PDP that you've done in LO1. So this was what we have used as a format to do our personal development plan, this bit here. And what we are doing then is reflecting on the development that we have done or the progress that we have made in the last 4 to 5 weeks on 4 areas: your English language skills, your note-taking skills, and your research skills. If you want to add maybe another, which I mentioned earlier, you can add IT to it, but these will be the 4 areas that you are going to be looking at, basically, let's say, discussing and reviewing your, your PDP, and they will cover task 4. So this assignment is going to be a combination of 3 templates that you're going to fill for task 1, 1 template that you're going to note taking, which you're going to fill for task 2, 1 research proposal, and finalization of that proposal into some form of a Word report would be the 2nd document. And then towards the end, you have to present it using a Zoom seminar that I'm doing. In that case, I will ask you to invite me to a Zoom meeting that you conduct. You'll be presenting and I'll be asking questions, and that will do the merit and the feedback and the distinction criteria. And then the last one is your review of your PDP, which is a Word document in which you're reviewing what you have done as set as targets earlier, how you have fared on those targets. If the targets have not been met, you are putting in further activities with new timeline, and when will you review? And that would be your reflection and completion of task 6 or task 4, sorry, learning outcome 6. And that will finish your assignment. So there are templates essentially to do, and I think 8, 3 plus 1, 4 plus 1, 5, 6, 7 templates in total that you have to complete for this particular unit. Is that okay?
Yep.
I'm going to summarize this and maybe send all the templates in one go to you on the email so that there is no confusion and everyone's got all the templates to fulfill. And I will clearly mention, and they will be worded, with the task's name. So if I send you something like a template for PDP, it will say 1M1, which is going to mean that it is for task 1.1M1. If you have 1.2, 1.3, 3.1, 3.2, they'll all be labeled accurately so that it gives you a clear idea that what task you're doing for the assignment brief and how you're hitting that criteria by completing this task on the template.
Thank you.
Okay.
Yeah.
Good stuff. So what I'll do is I'll end the session here. And if there are any further questions, any doubts, any areas that you need to discuss, then best is to feel free to drop me an email. And that email can actually come across, on learnerwork at UK Versity, so that what I will do is, depending on your query and your question, I'll respond to you appropriately so that you are able to get on and complete this unit. So for those of you who haven't submitted any of the tasks from task 1 so far, I would say a good idea would be to try and finish this unit off by, I would say, 30th of July, before 30th of July. So I would ideally say 2 weeks from 13th, which is today. So you should be able to look at, 26th, 27th, 28th of July and be able to submit all the drafts. So that if I have to give you some feedback, you have 1 or 2 days to rework on it, but we should be able to box and finish this unit in the month of July itself. And then on Friday, you will be, some of you who are doing the next unit will be receiving, the invites, Zoom invites, which will take us back to Saturday and Sunday, one of the days, 10 a.m. or 2 p.m., 10 a.m. or 3 p.m. to be able to start the next unit. And that will be, for the lectures of that unit. Okay, so let me go one by one and quickly check if we've got any questions. So let me check with Flora. Flora, do you have any questions for me?
At the moment, I don't have any question.
All right,
Yeah.
okay. Thank you, no problem.
Yeah.
Christina,
Maybe
any
what-
questions?
Yeah, I am just wondering, when is this course actually ending?
Well, for some of you, I think this is the last unit. So you should be looking at 26th, 27th is our certification visit. So for those of you who can submit this assignment before that date, maybe a day or two earlier, you should be looking at receiving your certification before the end of this month, before 30th.
Beautiful, thank you.
Is that okay? No
Yeah.
worries. Jefferson, any questions at your end? Jeff, can you hear me? Any questions at your end? All right, okay. Any questions at your end, Toby?
Hello.
Hi. Hi, Jeff.
Can you hear me now? Hello.
Yes, go on, Jefferson. I can hear you.
Yeah, I was saying something just now that I haven't received any email from you since this study. I don't know if you got my email right.
Give me 1 second. So can you just type your email on the chat address right now?
Okay.
Just to make sure, because I have got your email as it's a Yahoo email, isn't it? So I will type this here for you. That's the one that we have. Is this correct? So it is ekf2000@yahoo.com.
Yeah.
That's the address I have of your email in any case. But what I will do is, as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to send all the templates of this particular unit to you in one email. And I'll copy everyone on that
Okay,
email, so that once you receive, you acknowledge as well that you've received it.
Okay, please.
No worries, no worries.
Yeah, thank you.
Okay,
Yeah.
no worries. Thanks for letting me know, Jeff. Okay, Toby, any questions at your end? Can you hear me, Toby?
No, just that when I got the email, if I have questions, I can write you back.
All right. Okay, that's fine. No problem.
Yeah.
That's all good. So I had Tosin, which has dropped off, but that's fine. I will now end the session here, and I'll drop you an email with a copy of the recording on the chat, and also, a copy which is going to be from the YouTube channel of ours.
Hello.
So you have it available for.
Hello, can you hear me?
Yes, I can. Yes, go on, Toby. Yes, Toby, I can hear you. Go on.
The assignment, is it meant to be submitted to your email?
The assignment is to be submitted to learnerwork@ukversity.co.uk.
Okay, thanks. Can I get the template to myself? The template you actually want to send to at Jefferson?
Yes, I will send to everybody. I will mark
Okay.
this to everybody on the email.
All right, thanks.
Okay, no worries.
Okay.
So assignment not to be submitted to Jefferson, just copy and paste error, to be submitted to learner work.
Okay, thank you.
Okay, thank you. Okay, if there are any more questions, if there are, please let me know. Otherwise, we will catch up next week.
Thank you very much, sir.
Thank you.